I'm Dr. T, and welcome to my office. So today I'd like to start a conversation about proteins. But in order to understand proteins, which are polymers, we need to understand the monomer of the protein, which is known as an amino acid. The name amino acid comes from the fact that these are going to have an amine group and an acid group, because we're not original. Now, all biologically relevant amino acids, so the ones that actually get turned into proteins, are going to have a fairly regular structure. You're going to have an amine group, you're going to have a carbon, and then you're going to have an acid group. That carbon is referred to as the alpha carbon because in an older naming system, the carbon right after an acid is called alpha, the next one's beta, and so on and so forth. We kind of saw a taste of that when we talked about omega nomenclature for fatty acids. In this case, though, it's two carbons. One's in the acid, and then there's the alpha carbon. On the alpha carbon, there is a hydrogen, and then there is one more thing, what we call the R group. Because remember, in chemistry, R just means other or stuff. Now, the different amino acids differ by what that R group is. It could be another hydrogen, it could be a carbon and some stuff, and it does vary. There's about 20 standard amino acids. And I say about because there are, the amino acids, but then they get modified and adjusted. So if you look at a genetic code, that's going to code for amino acids, and typically speaking, there's 20 that it codes for. Some critters do some really weird stuff because some critters always do weird stuff. Now, when you look at the 20 or so standard amino acids, they can be broken down into a couple of different groups. And I'll caveat here that it depends on who's doing the splitting. In the sciences, we like to talk about clumpers and splitters. Clumpers like to group things by similarity, so we'll have a few large groups, where splitters like to split things up by differences, so I'll have many smaller groups. But with the amino acids, it's very common to separate them by their R groups. Those R groups that are nonpolar, so they're going to be hydrophobic. Those might be subdivided into hydrophobic and then aromatic, which will also be hydrophobic but are aromatic. Then you usually have a polar group of amino acids. Then you'll have the ionic amino acids, and these can be subdivided further into acids and bases. So if you have an acid amino acid, then it's going to have an acid functional group, and that will be negatively charged under most physiological pHs. Obviously, once you stick things into a protein, things can change, and local environment does affect the pKa of acids. But generally speaking, these are going to be deprotonated under relatively standard physiological pHs, and thus they'll be negatively charged, they'll be anions. The opposite, of course, would be a base. There are a few amino acids that are bases, so those will typically be positively charged under physiological pH. And so those two can be subdivided. And then there's a couple of amino acids that just are kind of oddballs and will quite often be put into kind of an other category. And with those can either be put into one of those other categories, which is called other. Generally, the major trends we're looking at, obviously, if it's charged, that's going to have some effects on the protein. If it's polar, that's going to have effects. If it's non-polar, it's going to have an effect. So, you're looking at kind of that general trend for these guys. Now, as I said, there's about 20 standard amino acids, and your body can make some of them, depending on the R group. Some of the R groups are relatively difficult for your body to make. It would require specialized enzymes that your body basically goes, I get these from my diet anyways. This would be a lot of overhead for me to have these specialized enzymes, so I'm just not going to have them. So for these amino acids where you don't have the ability to manufacture them, these are going to be essential amino acids. You have to acquire them from your diet. Now, if you're eating meat, other animals are going to have very similar blends of amino acids that you do. So in that case, there's your amino acids. Dietarily, or the nutritionists would say, protein, but you don't actually need protein. You need the amino acids from the protein. Now, if you're eating a plant-based diet, whether it be for ethical reasons, health reasons, or for the historically dominant reason of meat is actually kind of expensive, then you need to get those amino acids from plants. However, the nutritionists kind of simplify things. So you'll say, beans are rich in protein, wheat is not. Well, that's not quite the story. Wheat has lots of protein, but the blend of amino acids in your grains, which are all kind of grasses, don't match what you need. There are certain amino acids they're deficit in. The same story goes for legumes, which would be like your beans and whatnot. But the amino acids that those have a deficit in aren't the same ones as the grains. So if you have a diet that blends a grain and a legume together, then you will get the blend of amino acids you need. And in both cases, though, there's actually a ton of carbohydrates in those. Plants are preferring to make sugars when possible. It's easier for the plant to make sugars. So they use proteins where they have to. They don't use them if they don't have to. This is why, historically, if you look at traditional diets, you see this kind of pairing. Beans and rice, the classic, Cajun dish, red beans and rice. Alternatively, if you look at traditional Spanish cuisine, or I should say Mexican, Central American kind of style cuisine, you'll see a lot of, say, pinto beans or black beans paired with rice or corn. Refried beans with rice, refried beans, corn tortilla, that kind of stuff. Once again, that blend of grain and bean. You head over to an Asian cuisine, you're looking at tofu, which is a bean product, or soy sauce, which is also a bean product. And that's paired with rice, although the soy sauce is more about the salt than it is the protein. So this is very, very common, regardless of where you are. Good old pinto beans and cornbread. And this is because of this need to blend the amino acids together. So with that said, have a wonderful day.